2017 was the most expensive year on record for natural, or maybe you could call them unnatural, disasters in U.S. history, including a total of at least $306 billion in damage. That includes $18 billion of damages from fires in Northern California and Central California, which also killed at least 44 people. That includes $125 billion in damage in the greater Houston area during Hurricane Harvey, which also led to at least 93 deaths, and another estimated $90 billion in damages to the island territory of Puerto Rico, where at least 60 people died as a direct result of the storm, and as many as 1,000 lives may have been lost, and the longest running electricity blackout in U.S. history. So this is the new normal. And what's the latest from Houston and from Puerto Rico 6 months after these incredible storms? And what are folks doing on the ground to cope with the continuing challenges, and also to make plans for a more resilient future? Well, we've got an incredible panel of Sierra Club staffers here to talk about that today. With us from San Juan, Puerto Rico is Adriana Gonzalez. She's an organizer with the Sierra Club of Puerto Rico, and she coordinated the Sierra Club's response to Hurricane Maria and its aftermath. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Alejandra Nunez. She's a senior attorney with the Sierra Club's environmental law program, where she focuses on greenhouse gas emissions from the power sector. And then joining us from Houston is Brian Parras. He is one of the organizers of the Sierra Club's Beyond Dirty Fuels campaign, based there again, as I said, in Houston, Texas, where among many of his other work, he helped coordinate Sierra Club's response to Hurricane Harvey last fall. I'm your host for these conversations, Jason Mark. I'm the editor-in-chief of Sierra Magazine. So Adriana, let's begin with you there in the San Juan airport. You just got back from an energy and economics finance conference. I know there's a lot of action there behind you, but I'm wondering if you could talk about some of the ongoing challenges there in Puerto Rico 6 months after Maria.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, for having me here. And I'm actually at a good place, because what's happening in the airport is part of the situation that is going on in Puerto Rico. So because of the hardships that we've had with loss of power, with loss of many of the basic resources, there is a lot of people that are leaving the island. So migration actually outside of the island is one of the issues that we're facing. And like you mentioned, we've had the longest running blackout in history. And although a lot of the areas have restored electricity, it's still not a secure line. We're still seeing a lot of blackouts in and out and power outages.
We'll obviously have a lot of time to talk about the details, but Alejandra Nunez, I'd love to hear from you. I know you focus on the power sector. I mean, how is it possible that 6 months after this storm, there still is intermittent electricity in good chunks of the island?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Jason. So, well, there are a lot of difficulties. Obviously, this is a very unfortunate situation, but it also highlights the need for Puerto Rico to undergo a transformation of the electric grid. There have been a lot of inefficiencies in the provision of electric services before. The island has vertically integrated monopoly called the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, or PREPA. That was created in the 1950s. And there's a current recognition that the system needs to change, because the electric power system has been based mostly on oil. So this situation in the island currently is also a continuation, obviously exacerbated by the storm, of issues that have been happening before in terms of service provision. And there's a recognition that that the grid needs to undergo a transformation, and we in the Sierra Club hope that this sector moves toward clean energy, truly clean energy in the form of solar, for example.
Yeah, it's incredible to think that there are parts of the United States, including Puerto Rico, where they're still burning oil for electricity, which is a pretty outdated technology. Ryan, let's talk a little bit, and we'll come back to the situation in Puerto Rico, but what's going on now in Greater Houston? Now more than 6 months after Hurricane Harvey, and also I guess the question is, how would you characterize the situation there in Greater Houston?
Yeah, well, Houston is a big place. I just want to remind folks it's about 600 square miles. So you can imagine the large swath of work that's happening right now. And a large majority of folks have started the process of moving back into their homes that were flooded, but there's still a lot in progress. And, there's still a lot of, lawsuits that are happening. Liberty County just sued Arkema, for example. We know that
And who's Arkema?
Arkema was this plant that caught fire during the storm because it got flooded, and it was all over the news, and had this huge black smoke billowing from the plant, and we're basically just allowing the facility to explode, go through a series of explosions.
And that was the one where many first responders and neighbors got acutely sick, right?
Yeah, and they're suing also. They're suing the plant. And so, there are many other instances where toxics were released into the air, into the water, into the ground, near neighborhoods. And, I know that the TCQ is looking into several situations, particularly Valero, and in the Manchester area, Southeast Houston.
And that's the Texas Environmental Quality Agency?
Yeah, it stands for Texas Commission for Environmental Quality, and that's Rick Perry's old job.
Got it. Well, it looks like we might have lost Adriana for a second. I'm sure the Wi-Fi connection there might be a little bit spotty in the airport. But so let's stick with you, Brian, for a second. But Alejandro, I'd also love you to jump in to talk about the federal response, such as it was. How or perhaps how not did the federal government respond to what happened there in Houston, and what kind of relief have you all seen?
Well, there's still a lot of monies that have yet to make it to the city, and there are a lot of housing concerns with hundreds and thousands of people. I just came from South Texas too. We have to remember that this storm didn't just hit Houston, hit places as far away as Corpus Christi, all the way to Port Arthur, and Port Arthur is also working to get housing for a lot of folks, and a lot of other many issues related to the toxic spills that took place there. So right now we're seeing a lot of coalitions coming together, people getting organized and trying to be part of the process of how these dollars will be spent, which communities will be served, and a big focus on helping those neighborhoods and areas that are often forgot or least served when these monies come in.
And Alejandra, I'd love for you to address that. I know that you work on a number of different things, but why do you have a sense, why has the federal response here been so sluggish?
Yeah, so Jason, I was going to mention that it took this administration too long to decide to come to Puerto Rico. So this is a reminder of the fact that Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens and deserve the same attention that everyone else in the mainland and everyone else who is undergoing the effects of natural disasters. There has been a fight over budget funds to appropriate for disaster relief. And it took a long time. Like at the beginning, there was a big question about whether our Congress was going to allocate funding for Puerto Rico. And the Congress recently passed the supplemental. So as Brian said, and this applies also to Harvey and other places that have undergone storms, we are currently waiting for HUD, the Housing Department, to issue a notice that will be published in the Federal Register that would set forth the guidelines for the island, for the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, or the relevant states to prepare plans for how those monies will be allocated. And the Sierra Club will advocate strongly to ensure that those funds go to Puerto Rico, that they go to Texas, but in doing so, that they actually benefit those communities that need it the most. We have prior experiences with other storms, Sandy storm in New Jersey, where other advocates made sure that this happened, because and without those voices, some of the people that are living next to the most polluted areas, suffering the worst effects of these disasters, would not have received funding. So we're watching out for that.
Adriana, welcome back. I know it's probably a little tricky there being in the airport. So talking about reconstruction funds for Puerto Rico, I know that the Sierra Club Puerto Rico and the Sierra Club nationally has been pushing that some of these monies do go to energy transition. But even in the absence of that, I mean, what are you seeing from grassroots organizations just to say this is our chance again to transition to distributed energy, to microgrids, to wind and solar, and again to avoid things like burning oil for energy?
Yeah, definitely it's a great challenge that we need to find a systemic change. And like Alejandra was talking, we need to change the grid in Puerto Rico. From the grassroots and the response from communities, the first thing that happened was, for example, solar lanterns, which was what we were distributing in Puerto Rico with the Sierra Club. But not only us, many other groups were doing that. And it was an interesting conversation, distributing the solar lanterns, because we were able to bring solar energy to people in a very efficient, small way so that they can understand what is solar and have it in their house and actually be a resource for them at the beginning. The other response from the grassroots has been identifying, for example, community centers. We're working actually with 2 community centers, one in the south in Salinas and one on the east in Luquillo, that are going to get solar panels installed that have mostly been donated from different entities that have come to Puerto Rico to do support, to work on the electric grid. We've been able to secure donations of solar panels to these community centers. And this is going to bring a space for future, we don't want a future disaster, but we have to prepare and we have to build resilient communities. So it's building a resilient center for the community where they can have a solar energy center where they can go and plug their phones, plug their lanterns and other things. So the response has been, and we need to prepare for another event like this one, but we need to do it in a different way. We need to do it in a smarter way, and a way where people don't have to depend on outside support coming to their communities.
Brian, I'd love you to talk about that on that same kind of idea of rebuilding more resilient communities. Yeah. I mean, Houston is obviously, you guys are like ground zero for the oil and gas industry, right? I mean, this is like the headquarters of so much of the American oil and gas industry. So what could and should a more resilient way of rebuilding look like in Houston, especially regarding, I guess, the risks posed by all of this heavy industry?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the biggest things is the fact that, there will be more storms. And we have miles and miles of refineries and chemical plants that are not prepared for these, events. And we can't just plan for one type of event either. We have the storm surge. We have this unprecedented, rain event where it just sat on top of the city. We've had several of those occurrences. And each time, the refineries and the chemical plants do very little to prepare to address these issues that have already happened in the past, and they do very little to notify the community and public so that they can develop their own response plans. So those are things that we're working on too. And I'm one person here in Houston, so I'm working with a lot of grassroots partners that deserve a lot of credit for having started this work for years and years. They've been working on the East End, groups like Tejas. There's some new groups like COCO. Dr. Bullard is here at Texas Southern University. There are people who have been really working hard to organize these communities and advocate for more protection. And, they need our support. So those are things that are, the big picture problems. And they're flooded with chemicals every day. So there's layers and layers of contaminants and concerns that these people in these areas, next to the facilities have to deal with. We also have an immigration concern in terms of how the state and the city, perceive the immigrant community and are often targeted. So there are concerns about SB4 that just was ruled to be okay. And, it's basically an anti-sanctuary cities law that I'm sure will be replicated in other states. So we're going to have to pay.
And that's a Texas bill? That's a Texas legislature bill? Senate bill? Yeah.
Texas. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that and make sure that communities who are already, exploited in the labor force and the workforce and on the streets that they're not, you know, even more exploited because of laws like this. So, you know, there's also an influx of folks. I know several families who have moved to Houston from Puerto Rico too. So there's a lot of connections and potential allies, you know, on these issues as we all try and migrate away from the storms. You know, we leave one and we end up in another. There's still thousands of folks here from Katrina living in Houston, you know, who've been impacted. And, you know, it's important to remember too that when we talk about recovery, you know, people's homes and people's, you know, health and lives are having to deal with multiple storms that have happened. And so, you know, we have to look at addressing, you know, what happened at this storm, but we also have to remember that there are still many, many other things that have never been, you know, completely addressed from prior storms like Ike, Rita, Gustav, Katrina, and so on.
And I really want to thank you, Brian, for bringing that again to the fore. And I think I want to hear from you, Adriana, about the out-migration from Puerto Rico because of Maria, and then again, the long-running blackout. Folks maybe saw the article in Rolling Stone by Jeff Goodell saying that in 2017, there might be as many as, just from 1 year alone, as many as 1 million climate migrants or climate refugees due to these storms. So Adriana, what has been the impact on Puerto Rican society and on Puerto Rican families from the, I think now well more than 250,000 people who have left the island?
Yeah. I think coming back out of what Ryan was talking about, a lot of the communities that were most affected were communities that were historically affected by different systems, by other storms, and contaminated by different parts. So it's a lot of people that, you know, didn't have access to a lot of basic needs. And the storms just highlighted their situations and brought them into even worse situations. And as American citizens, you know, we have U.S. passports. People just get on a plane and no questions need to be asked, and they move to different states. And part of the concerns is that even though they're migrants, they don't receive support that other migrants might receive because they are still U.S. citizens. So that's one of the situations that we're seeing, that a lot of people are moving to Florida, Texas, New York, Chicago, but they're not bettering their lives. You know, they're not receiving other support. They're not getting into better situations. And what you see here in San Juan and in the island in exchange is definitely emptier everything. A lot of abandoned buildings. People have been leaving and just abandoning their pets, for example, is one of the issues that we see, abandoning cars, abandoning buildings. So you create a very dire landscape in some of the areas where people are just abandoning them. And the situation here is that we see also an influx of the people that are doing support staying in the island. So we see a lot of people that are working with, for example, FEMA and all these agencies taking blocks of hotels, taking blocks of area, and that's actually taking jobs from some people, because even though they are doing support and we don't want to take that away, the tourism is one of the biggest examples on economy in Puerto Rico, right? And if the hotels don't have room to put people, they can't do business. And if they can't do business, they are putting people out of work. And that is something that's a reality in the aftermath that we're seeing. A lot of unemployment. Some people were running businesses for months in diesel plants, and they just couldn't bear it and
diesel
are
generating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And from that, they're moving to the States. It's a dire situation. And one of the things that people are seeing is that some of the influx of people leaving, people are going to come back after maybe a year or so when things are more stable, but it's still unknown. But you can see it everywhere that there is less people here on the island.
Wow, it's incredible. I want to go to a couple audience questions. We've got some audience questions coming in via Zoom. I want to remind people that you can also put questions up there in the Facebook Live chat. So a question here from, looks like from John, and I guess this is either for you, Brian, or for Adriana, Alejandra. This would be for both, I guess, Texas and Puerto Rico. Is there just government, I guess, inefficiencies or red tape that's limiting assistance getting to individuals?
Do you want to go first, Adriana?
Yeah. Uh, so in Puerto Rico, it hasn't been very even. At the beginning, we could say there was a red tape. There was a lack of just resources getting to people. For the first month, you didn't really see anything going out except the grassroots organization organizing and bringing out support. After a month, we started seeing support coming out more at the municipal level. So we have 78 municipalities in Puerto Rico, and at the municipal level, you could see support coming out. And two of the main issues, and actually we experienced one of the issues, was transportation. We are an island, so getting all of the materials here by plane or by water, it was a really hard situation getting through all the red tape on that. And the second was then distribution. For the first few months, it was really hard to get around because of the debris, because of lack of gasoline. So getting that support out. Right now, I could say that we have been able to get a lot of support to people.
Brian, what about there in Houston? Evidence or experiences just with red tape and actually trying to get help to people?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above, right? It's oftentimes red tape, and there was some great reporting done by the Texas Tribune highlighting some of the red tape that was looking at the state's involvement in slowing down housing in particular. And also on the immigration issue, a lot of folks, were afraid to ask for help or didn't know if they could, because there's an atmosphere and environment of...
Because they were undocumented.
Undocumented, but even citizens who just, know that if they get engaged with the community, they think about their neighbors too and their family. And so it's not just a personal decision, but, it's oftentimes, am I putting my community in threat or encouraging, outsiders to come in? And then just lack of information. It's a big city, these services are not often provided to people in their language, and they're not even given information, in the community centers, civic clubs, all of the entities that you would hope are getting that data to the folks. So it's a myriad of issues. It's why we need more organizers, and I know that many of the groups in the different cities have been doing the best they can. The Houston group has been doing a lot of work, and Texas State Chapter has been doing a lot of work. So really, right now, what's happening is people are coming together and having conversations and, meeting each other, introducing each of the, different entities to learn how we can all help each other.
I'm glad you brought that question of the issue of language. I was down in Puerto Rico in November on a reporting trip. Adriana gave me a lot of assistance on that. And it was incredible to hear from families in shelters who were trying to talk to FEMA staff on some sort of 800 line and couldn't find staff who spoke Spanish, which just seems kind of like a no-brainer to be able to have a bilingual assistance on a federal helpline like that.
Yeah, no, it's true. And there's, other communities too that speak other languages. Houston's considered to be the most diverse city in the country right now. And there are dozens and dozens of other languages and communities who also are not getting that information.
Yeah, and adding on the support, on the FEMA support, a lot of people here, they needed to file the FEMA support. You needed to have a computer, an email address, and access to all of these things. It was really hard for a lot of people in the beginning. And there were community centers put up, but then the situation was that, as Brian was mentioning, either migration or actually people that didn't own the places that they live in, and they weren't able even to file the claim. So there was a lot of situation of people not having the titulares to their residence.
Titles. Titles to their homes. I've got a question here from Mark, and I think this would be good for either Alejandra or Adriana. Somebody wondering about what happened to the infamous Whitefish Energy of Whitefish, Montana, that of course was this small, I think 2 or 3 person firm from a small town in Montana that then got this ginormous contract to help rebuild the energy grid. And Mark's question is, he's got a couple questions here. Did the Montana company have to return any of those funds, either to the federal government or I guess to the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico? And then who's since replaced that, and is the work getting done? So Alejandra or Adriana, any update on the whitefish debacle?
I can say something that Alejandra can definitely add into the more federal part. What I can say on the ground, what we saw for the first month, again, no support, no trucks, no anything. We started seeing trucks like 2 months after the whitefish debacle. A lot of the companies that have been here are Thai, Con Edison. There's like 10 different companies. We were naming them the other day, mostly either from New York, from Florida, or even from like Georgia and other states. And they have been divided in different sectors of the island and doing most of the repowering. It is a concern that they have taken some of the work from the public workers here in the electric public company, that for some time they were literally just holding the material so that they couldn't work. So it's a lot of also like a political situation, like whitefish was, but I'll let Alejandra go into like the federal details.
So thanks to public pressure, there was a backlash against this lack of transparency in these contractual dealings with companies. So in relation to this, I wanted to mention that the regulatory authority in Puerto Rico, called the Puerto Rico Energy Commission, plays a critical role in ensuring that the electric rates that customers will pay, that utilities will charge customers are fair and reasonable, and in doing oversight of the provision of electric services. So the Puerto Rico Energy Commission has a statutory duty to oversee these kind of contracts. And there's currently a proposed reorganization plan submitted by the governor of Puerto Rico to the legislature in the Commonwealth to actually reorganize this agency and consolidate it with other agencies that regulate telecommunications, ports, and other services. The purpose would be to actually reduce expenditures and make the government more efficient. But this is something we're concerned about, because it comes at a time that the electric grid needs to be overseen by an independent regulatory agency like the Puerto Rico Energy Commission, who would help avoid this kind of non-transparent dealings. So it's very important that we're all aware that the Energy Commission's authority is at risk right now.
Yeah, thank you for that update. That was quite a stunning scandal there with that contract, and hopefully again those reforms will get put in place to avoid that sort of stuff in the future. We got a question here from Bob, and again a reminder to the audience: you can either put comments right there in the Zoom chat, or if you're on Facebook Live, put them there in the comments on Facebook. Bob wants to know, what can Sierra Club members and supporters who don't live in Houston or Puerto Rico, what can they do to help? And aside from any points, aside from the obvious thing of monetary donations, but are there any action opportunities? Is there any pending bills in Congress that folks should be aware of? But what else can folks do?
Well, I would say, there are, I think, over 5,000 members of Sierra Club in Houston alone. And certainly there should be conversations being had at every state and every group, every chapter about, their disaster plans and readiness. Because, we had hurricanes here, but there were also fires that you mentioned earlier in California. These things are going to continue to happen all over the country, and we need to be prepared and ready for that. How you can help in Houston, I would say, please follow the news, and follow the leadership of the local groups. There's monies that are coming down, and we're going to keep an eye on them, and hopefully they will have or that they will reach those that need it most. So I would say stay tuned. We will activate you as needed. But right now it's just doing what you're doing right now, listening and paying attention to what's happening.
Adriana, anything you would add to that? Just I guess in the Puerto Rican context.
Definitely the the last thing that Brian was mentioning, listening and learning about what is happening. It's very important that we understand the context of the situation because it might happen in other areas, even though we don't want it to happen in other areas. In Puerto Rico, the other thing that we're doing, there is a lot of pressure in Congress that we're doing, like Whitefish. That win was because of people being, in tune with what was happening and reacting to petitions and to calling their senators. So we're going to continue bringing those opportunities to Sierra Club for people to be petitioning, to call the Congress for better and more support to Puerto Rico. So just always keep in tune and look out for that. The other thing in Puerto Rico, we're still dealing with donations. So the Sierra Club still, like you mentioned, receiving donations for here. And, come to Puerto Rico during the summer on your vacation because the tourism industry needs more people coming here.
It's a beautiful island. People should take Adriana up on that invitation. We have a question here, and it's from Ling, and probably for Alejandro or Adriana. Just kind of a follow-up about the microgrids. Like, what is actually the next step in terms of actually getting from solar lanterns, I guess, to more, real microgrids, whether that's neighborhood-based or, sort of municipality or town-based. What is it actually going to look like, those various stages to get to that vision?
So thank you, Jason. This has to do with the Energy Commission and the need for having a robust oversight authority. So it's very important to keep an eye on all these proposals to reorganize the Energy Commission, which recently proposed a regulation on microgrids. And the whole point of creating a legal framework for microgrids is to enable structures that will be able to continue to provide electric service in the event of disasters. Microgrids can be disconnected from the grid. And in certain places, for example, New York University, during the Sandy storm, the university has its own microgrid, so they were able to disconnect from the grid and continue to provide electric service. So we, the Sierra Club of Puerto Rico, submitted comments. Our coalition partners in the island did as well, because we really want structures like microgrids to be enabled in the island. And in doing so, we want to make sure that communities can have voice and that they can also have ownership of these projects. But as I said, it's very important to follow what's happening with the plans to reorganize the Energy Commission, because were that commission to disappear, in addition to all the different issues that we've mentioned before, not having an oversight authority would be really terrible, but it would also put at risk the future of microgrid regulation, which there's something that could be finalized and hopefully fairly soon, in time for unfortunately an upcoming storm, right? That we're hoping next time we'll be better prepared.
This is kind of a follow-up question maybe for you, Adriana. Tammy on Facebook wants to know, are there any, I guess it's really hardware issues, actually getting solar panels to the island, actually getting the physical technology there?
So there was a lot of that in the beginning. Right now, logistically, it's easier. We do have the airports functioning, all the ports are functioning. There is some situations here with the framing of our imports and exports with the Jones Act. So for anything to come to Puerto Rico, needs to come out of a U.S. port. So that does limit, and it's part of those regulations that Alejandra was mentioning. And that's a broader regulation for everything that comes in and out of Puerto Rico. So that's a challenge because we can't bring, for example, solar panels that are in the Dominican Republic or in other places that are closer to us. That's one of the logistical challenges. And then installing them, Puerto Rico, part of why it has been so hard to repower the electric grid, even though we're a very small island, we have a lot of varied landscapes. We have mountains, we have beaches, we have karst regions. So it is a complicated landscape to start building those things in different areas. And for the solar, we have to identify things such as, the sun here is a resource that is constant. That's not a concern. But space is a concern. We are an island again, so we need to install them in places that are not taking space for agriculture or other things that we need.
Right. Alejandra, I'd love to kind of following up on this. So you and Adriana were just at a conference all about, energy, economics, and finance. So is there any like new private money or private capital moving into this space and thinking about rebuilding in Puerto Rico and building a more resilient, clean, renewable energy system?
So the governor of Puerto Rico recently announced that PREPA, the electric power authority in Puerto Rico, will be privatized. There are several pieces to this. The generation sector will be privatized entirely, and the transmission and distribution sectors will be granted, the operation of these sectors will be granted in a concession to private corporations within a time frame of 18 months. We are very concerned about the lack of transparency. We are putting pressure to get more information about the concrete terms of this transformation. So there are a series of companies that are interested, and we were recently at a listening session by the Financial Oversight Board of Puerto Rico in New York City. There are companies that already have what they think is the vision for the island, but in those, and also in the statements made by the governing board of PREPA, there's not much mention of oversight by the Puerto Rico Energy Commission and for the voices, community voices, the voices of labor to be heard in this process, to have a say in designing these transactions in a way that if we're going to transform the grid into renewable energy, we also need to make sure that that clean energy benefits the communities that need it the most. And that's something that we're concerned, and we're asking for transparency in this process. So we're following this very, very closely. We don't have details, concrete details yet. So
yeah.
I'm really glad you brought that up.
I was going to add one thing about what's happening on what we've seen also a lot of like philanthropic and solar companies wanting to come to Puerto Rico and like donate systems to communities, which we see it as a good thing, but we also want to take it with caution. Some of the groups that we've worked with on that, we want to ensure that any of the systems that they're building in communities, they pass the knowledge to the community so that they just come in and put in these solar panels and these batteries and don't train the community to understand what the transition. Again, we want it to be a just transition where the communities are understanding the power that they have by having the solar panels. So even, we see in good eyes all these companies coming to donate these systems, but we want to make sure that the knowledge is also transferred to the communities.
Right, so it's a true exchange and not just sort of like a charity kind of thing. And I just, to swing back to Alejandra's point, in case some viewers don't know, I think what you were talking about, the Financial Oversight Board, people should understand that because of a debt crisis, Puerto Rico doesn't have full self-determination of its own budget. And in fact, budgetary decisions are overseen by a board that sits all the way in New York City and is undemocratic and unaccountable. So another thing that complicates the entire rebuilding effort there. And just want to remind folks, again, you can make comments or questions in the Zoom chat and or via Facebook Live. Just, I think, a comment here from a woman named Carol, but Adriana, you should probably follow up with Carol. She says she works with the New York State's Nurses Association. They're very much interested in coordinating a medical relief mission there that would focus on environmental issues, housing issues, public health, and animal welfare. Seems more like a comment than a question, but I think, Adriana, you should reach out to the folks at the New York State Nurses Association who sound like they want to get involved. Brian, I want to go back to you. You were talking about rebuilding in general and preparing for future storms. One of the things that really came clear in the greater Houston area was you'd had all of these, either the city of Houston or Harris County or the municipalities, not just allowing, but in fact encouraging building in floodplains. And all of these homes that had basically been built in areas where probably, rationally it didn't make sense to build homes. So I'm wondering, how's that conversation going? Is there any new talk about a smarter way to build? And I guess also the question is then what would happen to those people who already live in such areas?
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem of growth there's been a large influx of people coming into the city. And if you don't know, one, Houston doesn't have any zoning laws. And so that's part of the problem. So from the get-go, there's a deliberate absence of planning. And two, there are not very good checks on how development should happen. So there are some regulations to offset, more concrete, but oftentimes there's no one looking in to see if those things are happening. And certainly we shouldn't be building homes in floodplains. Why that was allowed to happen is another interesting question. So right now the debate is, do we rebuild according to the 100-year plan flood maps or the 500-year plan flood maps? And that's being discussed and talked about. But the really difficult thing is, there's just so many other questions now, because none of those take into effect the climate changing. And just saying 100-year, 500-year doesn't really mean a whole lot when we've had several 500-year storms in the last 3 years.
Right.
So until that sort of completely new flood map is drawn, I think we're going to continue to see more flooding and more building in areas where there just shouldn't be homes.
And Adriana, is that also a conversation in Puerto Rico? I know when I was there on the island, I talked to some folks, including Sierra Club partners, with the folks at the Northeast Corridor, who expressed concern of all the coastal development. I mean, obviously Puerto Rico is an island. It's got all these lovely beaches. You want to be on the beach and enjoy the beaches, but that some beaches it doesn't make sense to build on.
Yeah, it's part of the same issues that actually Houston has. We have a lot of people that have built in floodplains. We have a lot of people that have built in flood areas. A lot of bad drainage systems, and the debris makes that even harder. So when you have a flooding, it gets even worse because there's no drainage. And then we actually saw, like last week, storm surges. We had waves breaking records of like 20 to 30 feet because of the storms in the north, and we see it here on our beaches. So in Old San Juan, for example, one of the areas that had already recovered from Maria lost like half of its coastal infrastructure because of the big waves now a few weeks ago. So we see that definitely we can't follow, like Brian was mentioning, the patterns that we thought that were the norm. We have to start creating new norms, which mean that we have to construct really far away from the coast and do smarter planning. We also we still don't have a good zoning here in Puerto Rico. And the zoning laws with the terrain that's on the beach and close to that, it's a really bad law, and it has been trying to get redone for many years, but it hasn't. We have many of the same situations.
And I think on that point of new norms, that might be a great way to approach the end of this conversation. I'd love to give each of you, Brian and Alejandra and Adriana, a chance to offer some final thoughts and some parting words for our audience of Sierra Club members, supporters, and champions. So we'll just go counterclockwise here. Brian, you want to head off any final words, and especially I think a little bit of a focus on, again, what people can do, even if they don't live in Houston or in Puerto Rico.
Well, I think one, people need to be more engaged, more involved, and supporting the local grassroots groups in your community, wherever you are, is a very good place to start. It's important to have allies already in place when these disasters hit, so that you can be prepared, to deal and help with folks that need it most. So support your EJ groups, support your climate justice groups, learn the politics, learn the infrastructure, who is in control of, the electrical grids, the water systems, housing, education. We didn't even go into education, but, there's a lot that happens with public education after these storms hit. So all of these things are ways for folks, to be engaged before, during, and after. And the smarter you are, the more prepared you are, the more allies you've already connected with, the faster everyone can recover.
And just want to make sure everybody understood that one acronym that Brian threw out, EJ, is Environmental Justice Group. So find your environmental justice, find your climate justice groups that are there in your neck of the woods. Alejandra, any final thoughts from you? And again, kind of focusing on, you know, what the Sierra Club's doing to put in place, you know, processes for recovery.
Well, as Adriana mentioned, we continue to raise funds. In the case of Puerto Rico, our commitment is that 100% of the funds we have collected will go to people in the island. These funds don't stay with the Sierra Club. So we appreciate your help continue supporting these community groups that are supporting all the members, all those families who live in the island who don't want to migrate because they want to rebuild the island. Participate also in every public engagement process you can. As Adriana had mentioned earlier, call your champs in Congress at the federal level. They will be another voice that will help elevate these concerns in Puerto Rico and also in Texas to put pressure on our legislature. And also if you can follow and have the ability to comment on what's happening with how infrastructure is going to be built. For example, in Puerto Rico, one thing that we didn't mention earlier is, Jason, as you mentioned, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico and several of the public monopolies that provide services in the island are undergoing bankruptcy proceedings in New York. They are being overseen by a board in New York that was created during the Obama administration. Congress passed a law called PROMESA to allow for a restructuring of the finances of these entities. There are specific comment processes, and one thing that matters a lot to us that we haven't mentioned is there is a process that's called critical infrastructure designation. The Puerto Rico chapter and our allies in the island have been fighting a proposed incineration project for many years. That project came up again at the federal level through that process. If that oversight board were to fast track that project, then it wouldn't undergo the proper environmental approvals, the requirements of the different energy laws. We have been commenting on that process, and for some reason that we're still trying to figure out, the proponent called Energy Answers recently withdrew the project from consideration, but the board has indicated it's free to resubmit it. So there are specific mechanisms. We obviously want to hear from residents in the island to speak up and raise information on the health harms, on the environmental harms, all these threats. There are different venues where these things are happening, and we are more than happy to provide information on deadlines for comment, how to provide testimony. Even if you're not in the island, all these things are very helpful. The club is doing it very actively, our allies in the island as well. So if you can help us with that, that's something that we will really appreciate.
Adriana, any final words from you?
Yeah. First of all, learning about Puerto Rico, the hurricane just exacerbated many of the issues that we were having. We have been in an economic crisis for over a year now. We've had many things that aren't just happening here. So looking at a map, learning where Puerto Rico is, learning about what's happening here is one of the first things that I always ask people. And then learning from our experience that we've had from this hurricane. And like Brian was mentioning, work with your communities to make sure that you're ready for any of the situation, because we don't want it for it to happen to anyone, but we need to be ready. And this creates more organized communities that have better lifestyles, that bring better resources to the people that live in, and we assure that we can all continue to have a good way of life. And I guess the other Sierra Club here is still, so if you're listening from Puerto Rico, we're still here giving out solar lamps, we still have water filters, we're still giving out help and support to organizations that need it. So reach out to us, because we're still doing a lot of work that needs to be done. And if you still don't have power, we've given more than 10,000 solar lanterns throughout the whole island, and we are bringing even more to make sure that even if you have power or you do not have power, you have one at your access. And again, inviting people to come to Puerto Rico, and also identifying groups in their communities that are We Puerto Ricans, as I mentioned, are everywhere in the U.S. So find your local Puerto Ricans and talk to them and see if they need any support with their families.
Well, I want to thank all of you three for taking the time, especially Adriana, who's in transit there and speaking to us from the San Juan airport. Thank you so much for all of your great work, your energy, advocacy, and vision. And thank you, our Sierra Club members and supporters. It sounds like Brian's got one last thing.
Yes, can I add one thing? I just want to thank, all of the members and supporters of Sierra Club who did donate, because a lot of those funds were used to help build relationships and meet needs from these most marginalized communities. And it's been a great asset. And I continue to follow up with the many groups that we helped. Thank you. And what we also are hoping is that we have a new generation of young folks being trained in industries that don't rely on the fossil fuel industry. We've seen great leadership from our youth, so I want to thank them, for all of the work that has been done, and we need to help support that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, Brian. Thank you for that note of gratitude to all of the Sierra Club supporters, not obviously just joining in today, but who made donations. So Adriana, Alejandra, Brian, sigan adelante. Thank you so much for your great work. Thank you again, all of the members and supporters for joining today. We will have our next Sierra Forum next month in April and another one in May. Tune in. You'll get alert on that on the usual channels, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and at sierraclub.org. Thank you guys so much, and see you in the streets.